Ever had a job you hated, but you stuck around because, well, bills? Now imagine that job is a world-famous movie role, one that fans never let you forget. Yeah, awkward. Believe it or not, some of Hollywood's biggest stars can't stand the roles that made them famous. And I'm not talking about some random B movie they did for rent money. These are the films that defined their entire careers. From superheroes who loathe the suit to romance leads who cringe at their own love scenes. These actors would rather erase these movies from history than ever relive them. But why? What went so horribly wrong behind the scenes? And just how bad does it have to be for an actor to go, yeah, I'd rather not be famous? Stick around, because once you hear these stories, you'll never watch these movies the same way again. Alright, let's be honest. Hollywood is weird. One minute, an actor is saying how much they love a role, and the next, they're roasting it like it personally ruined their lives. But can you blame them? Imagine spending years in a ridiculous costume, saying the same 5 lines, while every interviewer asks, so what was it like playing this character for the 100th time? Yeah, it gets old real fast, and just wait until you hear what went down behind the scenes. One actor almost punched his director, another got trapped in a role so cringy they've been mocking it for years, and one, well, let's just say, he really, really hates musicals. Let's jump into 10 actors who regret their most famous roles. And trust me, some of these will shock you. 10 Burt Reynolds hated Boogie Nights. Imagine giving the performance of your career, getting rave reviews, and even landing an Oscar nomination, only to despise the movie that made it happen. That was Burt Reynolds with Boogie Nights. Yeah, the guy absolutely hated it, and not in a meh, wasn't my best work kind of way. More like he wanted to erase it from existence. During filming, he clashed constantly with director Paul Thomas Anderson. He thought the guy was arrogant, inexperienced, and downright annoying. Things got so bad, Reynolds allegedly tried to punch him, and even after the movie became a massive success, he still refused to watch it. In fact, he was so angry, he fired his agent for convincing him to take the role. Because, you know, why be proud of an Oscar-nominated performance when you can just pretend it never happened? Burt Reynolds remained a legend, but Boogie Nights? Yeah, as far as he was concerned, it might as well have never existed. And if you think that's bad, just wait till you hear about the actor who hated being Batman. 9. Christian Bale thinks he failed as Batman. You'd think being one of the most beloved Batmans in history would be a career highlight, right? Well, not for Christian Bale. Despite the Dark Knight trilogy being a massive success, Bale looks back on his performance and basically says, according to him, he never quite nailed the role. He wanted Batman to feel deeper, more complex, but instead, he thinks he got outshined by none. Yeah, I mean, sure, he redefined Batman, made billions at the box office, and turned The Dark Knight into one of the greatest superhero movies ever. But, you know, total failure. To be fair, Bale was trapped in that ridiculous Batman voice, which even he admits was a little too much. He later said that every time he put on the suit, he felt like he was just grunting through a sore throat for 3 movies straight. So while fans still worship his take on The Dark Knight, Bale himself, he's not impressed. But hey, at least he didn't spend years playing a sparkly vampire he openly despised. 8. Robert Pattinson loathed Twilight. Imagine starring in a movie franchise that makes you a global superstar, and then spending the rest of your life roasting it every chance you get. That's Robert Pattinson with Twilight. From day one, he thought Edward Cullen was a weirdo, and not in a mysterious, brooding vampire way, more like a creepy stalker who watches girls sleep away. In interviews, he straight up mocked his own character, saying Edward was basically a depressed 108-year-old virgin with control issues. Yeah, you know it's bad when even the actor playing the role is questioning all of Edward's life choices. And don't even get him started on the fan obsession. Pattinson was so uncomfortable with how seriously people took Twilight that he actively avoided fans and spent years distancing himself from the franchise. Luckily, he managed to escape the vampire curse and rebuild his career with way darker, weirder roles. But to this day, if you mention Twilight to him, you can practically see his soul leave his body. And if you think he had it rough, wait till you hear about the actress who had to suffer right alongside him. 7. Kristen Stewart had a love-hate relationship with Twilight. if Robert Pattinson couldn't stand Twilight. Then imagine being Kristen Stewart, who not only had to star in it, but also deal with the insane fan obsession that followed. While she appreciates what the movies did for her career, Stewart has been very open about how awkward, cringy, and overwhelming the whole experience was. For starters, playing Bella Swan, not exactly the dream role. Bella spends most of the series staring blankly, biting her lip, and falling for a vampire who treats her like his personal science experiment. Even Stewart admits that some of the lines were impossible to say with a straight face. I mean, try saying, "You're like my own personal brand of heroin," without laughing. Go ahead, I'll wait. But the real nightmare? The fan obsession. Stewart's every move was analyzed, criticized, and turned into internet memes. The pressure was so intense, she said in interviews, that it left her mentally drained and desperate to move on. Luckily, like Pattinson, she broke free and built a career beyond Twilight. But deep down, she'll always be the girl who fell for a sparkly vampire. And speaking of actors who wanted to escape their most famous roles, wait till you hear about the guy who played James Bond and regretted it. 6. Sean Connery wanted nothing to do with James Bond. You'd think being the original James Bond would be a badge of honor, right? Not for Sean Connery. Despite defining the role and turning 007 into a global icon, Connery grew to hate it. He felt trapped, typecast as the suave secret agent, and worst of all, he couldn't escape Bond. No matter what he did, over time, his frustration boiled over. He once said he'd rather slash his wrists than play Bond again. And when people kept calling him James in real life, oh, he was furious. Imagine walking down the street trying to live your life, and random strangers just keep going. Shaken, not stirred. Yeah, that would get old real fast. By the time Diamonds Are Forever, 1971, rolled around, Connery was so done that he demanded a massive paycheck just to return. After that, he left Bond behind for good. But hey, at least he wasn't the only Bond actor with regrets, because the next guy, he barely even got started. 5. Timothy Dalton never wanted to be James Bond. Sean Connery grew to hate Bond. But Timothy Dalton, he regretted it before he even started. Dalton took on the role in The Living Daylights, 1987, and License to Kill, 1989, bringing a darker, grittier edge to 07. But behind the scenes, he never really wanted the job. He was actually offered the role years earlier, but turned it down because he thought he was too young. When he finally said yes, he quickly realized he'd stepped into a trap. The pressure of playing Bond was insane, and the fan expectations impossible to meet. Then, just when he was supposed to make a third Bond film, legal issues delayed production for years, and by the time they were ready, Dalton was done. He basically went, "You know what? Forget it. Keep your martinis. I'm out." Dalton later admitted he never saw himself as a long-term Bond, and looking back, he's more than happy he walked away, but at least he left on his own terms, unlike the actress who got completely trapped by her most famous role. Number 4. Olivia Hussey couldn't escape Romeo and Juliet. Most actors dream of landing a career-defining role, but for Olivia Hussey, playing Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, 1968, felt more like a curse than a blessing. At just 15 years old, she became an overnight star, with critics calling her performance legendary. But the problem? She could never move past it. For years, directors only saw her as Juliet, which meant Hussey struggled to land new, diverse roles. Instead of a long Hollywood career, she spent decades trapped in the shadow of one character. Because, you know, once you've played history's most famous tragic teen, apparently there's nowhere left to go. Even worse, the controversy that followed her years later. In 2023, she and her co-star sued Paramount over their infamous nude scene, claiming they had been exploited as minors. What should have been a dream role turned into something Hussey would be forced to revisit again and again. But if you think that's bad, just wait till you hear about the actor who literally can't stand watching himself in his most famous movie. Number 3. Kate Winslet cringes at Titanic. You'd think starring in one of the biggest movies of all time would be something to celebrate, right? Well, not if you're Kate Winslet. Despite Titanic, 1997, making her a household name, Winslet can't stand watching herself in it. She's said in interviews that when she sees her performance, she feels like throwing up and wishes she could redo the whole thing. Yeah, imagine winning Oscars, global fame, and a never-ending fan base, and all you can think is, ugh, Why did I say that line like that? But it's not just her acting that makes her cringe. Winslet hates her accent in the film, saying it wasn't consistent enough and that she could have done way better. And don't even get her started on the draw me like one of your French girls scene. She's embarrassed that people still ask her to sign pictures of it because, well, awkward. At least she can laugh about it now, but back then, she couldn't wait to move on. And speaking of actors who despise their most famous roles, wait till you hear about the guy who refused to even acknowledge his. 2. Christopher Plummer hated The Sound of Music. For millions of people, The Sound of Music, 1965, is a beloved classic. But for Christopher Plummer, it was absolute torture. He played Captain Von Trapp, the stern yet lovable father of 7, but behind the scenes, he thought the role was boring, cheesy, and completely beneath him. Yeah, while the rest of the world was singing Do-Re-Mi, Plummer was probably in the corner plotting his escape. He despised the film so much that he started calling it The Sound of Mucus. And in interviews, he straight up admitted that playing Captain Von Trapp was one of the most frustrating experiences of his career. Even worse, no matter what other roles he took on, even winning an Oscar later in life, people still just saw him as the guy from The Sound of Music. He mellowed out a bit in his later years, admitting the film was well made, but deep down, he never fully forgave it for turning him into a musical movie dad. But as much as Plummer hated his most famous role, our number 1 pick is on another level of regret. This actor not only hated the role, he hated the entire movie. Burt Reynolds regretted Boogie Nights. Immediately, you'd think starring in a movie that earns you an Oscar nomination would be a good thing, right? Not for Burt Reynolds. When he took the role of Jack Horner, the adult film director in Boogie Nights, 1997, he had no idea what he was in for. And once he found out, he hated every second of it. For starters, Reynolds couldn't stand director Paul Thomas Anderson. The two clashed constantly, with Reynolds calling him immature and refusing to work with him ever again. That's right, this man would rather do another Smokey and the Bandit sequel than spend 5 more minutes on Boogie Nights. But his biggest regret, the subject matter. Reynolds was deeply uncomfortable with the film's world of adult entertainment and reportedly turned the role down multiple times before finally giving in. Even after the film became a massive success, he refused to watch it, and when awards season rolled around, he fired his agent for convincing him to take the role in the first place. Yep, not only did Reynolds hate his most famous role, he literally punished people for making him take it. Now that's next level regret. So what did we learn today? Even the biggest stars can despise the very roles that made them famous. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, don't forget to hit that like button, because let's be real, after all that Hollywood drama, you're definitely coming back for more. And hey, if you ever land a huge career-defining role, maybe think twice before signing that contract. Just ask Burt Reynolds.